Hey there, you're back with another Soulwidth Podcast. I am your host, Luke JJ, and my guest today is Michael from Falun Gong, Falun Dafa. This is a very, very interesting podcast that we have because the more I go into it, the more I'm interested in the history and everything associated with this exercise, this form of movement. I don't think there's ever really been anything like it that would have this sort of historical aspect. Would you agree, Michael?
Absolutely. Actually, it's become an incredibly large world focus. That's what I would say, especially because the persecution that it's come under from the Chinese government has made it actually an incredibly large focus. And I guess in a retrospective way, it's kind of good because the practice is gorgeous. And the fact that the regime has done what it's doing to it has only put it more in the spotlight and has allowed millions upon millions more people to participate in it and benefit from it.
I went into a deep dive yesterday and I felt like I could have kept on going all day. There was just it's so intriguing, but also so heartbreaking. Can you give us a bit of a background on it, please?
Look, I'll give you Look, you're right. There's so many factors in it, but I'll give you the rawness of it. Back in 1992, a man named Li Hongzhi, who was a Qigong master, came to the public of China and began to teach a practice named Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa. Falun means law wheel in Chinese. Gong is high energy matter, like Qi Gong. And Falun Dafa is law wheel, great law. Dafa, great law. Now, when he began to teach it, it was just in seminar format. So people would go to some sort of hall or something, and Teacher Li would teach the cultivation way of Falun Dafa, which is a marked difference from when, for example, we go into a particular meditation practice or yoga or things like that, where, of course, magnificent things, and we're learning to calm our minds, find centeredness, etc., etc. With Falun Dafa, there is an enormous teaching of what's called the Buddha Fa of Falun Dafa. So it's a teaching of cosmic law, and that incorporates the human body, the universe, gods, Taos, and Buddhas, etc., etc., etc. And that may sound rather big, but in actual fact, it's not. That's one of the things that I found remarkable with this practice is Teacher Li is explaining some of the deepest, most profound principles that literally transcend all religion and are part of all orthodox proper religions, but in the most open way, explaining things from every angle, the most profound principles. So anyway, started teaching, and one of the things that was found was that everything Teacher Li was talking about in his lectures was actually happening for the people who were there learning from him. And of course, this was simply a lecture series. So I think in the beginning it was a 10-day lecture series, so 10 consecutive days. Everyone would come back. Now, because just from my little 21 years worth of cultivating, and please everyone remember this, 21 years might sound like a long time to be devoted to one practice, but it really isn't. Just from my little understanding, one of the main aspects that made Falun Dafa different was Teacher Li is expounding on massive things, and those massive things have to do with the energies that we all know of ourselves and the universe. We feel them, we sense them, we hypothesize about them a lot, which we should. But what was happening in China was that so many people, because it's fundamentally a cultivation way of the Buddha school, everything that we know of the Buddha school, the compassion, the kindness, the letting go of all of these attachments within us that naturally have to be let go of if we're going to follow an enlightening path. The people who were going were having quite remarkable things happening. But at the same time, Teacher Li was very very upfront about things needing to be done in a way that didn't create some sort of open hysteria. You know, you go to teach these thing and everyone rises up in the air and drifts off to heaven. No, not at all. It's a true cultivation way. So it's hard work on your heart, your mind. It's principles and levels of compassion and tolerance that I guess all of us would aspire to be honest. I don't think even the meanest people really want to be mean. They actually would like to be nicer and better. So all of these things were happening in China, lecture series after lecture series. The word spread like wildfire because one thing I think when I started to practice Falun Gong, I had a huge time where I needed to know about these things for myself. I certainly didn't come into Falun Gong seeking, and I'll tell you about how I came into Falun Gong soon. So I studied a lot of what China was really like right now and in the last sort of 20, 30 years. Had a look at what is known as Qigong. And of course, this was all inspired by my practice. So when I really got to the bones of what China is, it seemed to me that the real quintessential things have always been there. The quintessential things of human life, existence, of spiritual existence and teaching, lots of things like that. And the aspect that had taken it to become so widely taken in by the Chinese people, I think, was that Falun Gong was bringing back what they already knew were the right things. Maybe not the fundamental, incredible nature of the principles Teacher Lee was explaining, but energetically the things beyond words, the things we feel, like love and kindness or movement in our heart, those things, they knew it. And on top of that, so simply so many, there's a book like this thick that's written on it. So many people were having, I guess you could say, mini miracles happen for them with their health, with their families, all kinds of things. It really was. It was quite amazing. And so this was the heyday in China. Now, what happened was very quickly was, even though the communist regime in China is atheist and always has been, a lot of their people started practicing Falun Gong. So you've got this hardcore communist, probably the last hardcore communist regime, having so many of its people starting to practice Falun Gong, this Buddhist school Qigong. And as it became more and more popular, 1997, so 1992 it started being taught. By 1997, 100 million Chinese people around China were practicing and really practicing.
So Master Lee started it in 1992.
He started teaching the world in 1992, starting with China. Teacher Lee himself, anyone who's interested in Falun Gong, I would highly recommend reading Zhuan Falun. You can certainly look up, Teacher Lee has an autobiography. But from what I remember of reading the autobiography, there's a couple of main things that Teacher Lee that set him apart in certain ways. Teacher Lee, I think I remember from the autobiography, it was 12 masters came to Teacher Lee of the differing schools, Tao school, Buddhist school, and Shiman school. And the other thing that I found remarkable, and all of the papers are there for this, before Teacher Lee came out to start teaching everyone, he went to the Beijing Scientific Academy, which is China's premier scientific household threshold. And he basically gave himself to testing because, in my understanding, because we're all so scientific these days, and it is a massive part of our thinking because to a large degree, we've let go of a lot of orthodox spiritual things and we've sort of grasped onto or been indoctrinated in different ways. Not saying that as a negative, but scientific things. And Teacher Lee knew that this would be something that people wanted, also as a genuine thing. So Teacher Lee gave himself to testing and did some things that none of the scientists there could ever explain, to be honest. One was a very simple thing. In the institution, they had a regular test for Qigong masters, which was they would get a completely sealed glass test tube with a piece of aluminum in it, and they would give it to the Qigong master to hang on to and radiate his energy into it. And then they would go take it away to test that piece of aluminum, test the energy that was there with what obviously their apparatus can fathom from the changes. And so this truly is like it's a magnificent way of seeing that Qigong masters genuinely have amazing energies, genuine Qigong masters. But Teacher Lee actually changed the metallic molecular structure of the entire piece, which is not possible. It's just simply not possible. And so these kinds of things, Teacher Lee really wanted to just be so completely transparent and upfront. And this has been in China. For anyone who's been to China, you'll certainly know that a lot has changed in China. The people of China over the last 70 years of being under a totalitarian rule naturally have had a very, very hard time. But the people of China also knew that this is something genuine. This was something genuine. So moving forward from there, I don't know if many of you will have heard of the Tiananmen Square massacre.
Yes.
You can see from me, I'm a little bit on the old side, so I know it well. But for any younger ones that don't, it was basically where thousands upon thousands of students back in the early 80s, I believe, or the mid 80s in China started to heavily protest against the communist regime, simply because they'd had enough of a tyrannical totalitarian regime. And I mean, you truly can't underestimate that or sugarcoat it in any way. It was horrific. And so there was a young cadre in the government named Jiang Zemin. And this is all something that you can all study for yourselves, of course, what I'm about to say. And this young cadre wrote a document to the then president of China, premier of China, explaining how he feels our communist government, which he would have said from his angle, should deal with this uprising from the children. And what these kids had done is they'd all congregated in Tiananmen Square and were staying there. They were staying there until the government came to them and started to have conversations about change. And this young cadre, Jiang Zemin, explained exactly what happened in the Tiananmen Square massacre. And that's what the premier at the time enacted to make the Tiananmen Square massacre. And so the short on that is they rolled tanks into Tiananmen Square and rolled over hundreds and hundreds of children.
Yeah, there's a famous photo online about someone standing in front of the tanks.
Yep.
And just to see that photo, that's what you're really going against. You're going against the Chinese government, which is a tank, and these people are just all humans, but they're trying to stand up for what they believe in, aren't they?
Well, they're trying to stand up against the most horrific repression and way of being a government that I think has ever been institutionalized in any country. We have Pol Pot, we have Stalin. They are men of similar vein. They are birds of the same feather, but they have never done what. I'll give you an example. Mao Zedong once said, he scoffed in an interview at Stalin, saying something like he only killed 4.6 million people. We've killed 60 million. So and what he meant by the killing was when Stalin took over, he killed a certain amount of people because that's what a communist totalitarian sort of thing does. But with Mao, when he took over and really took root there, all in all, they killed 80 million innocent people, not in war. They weren't warring with them, by the way. The war had finished. So this was all part of their stripping away all of the traditional morals, the traditional spiritual essences, the highly educated, the wealthy. They stripped away every single fraction that they feel would go against them.
Can you explain, in a sense, why they would go about that way?
Well, this is, I certainly don't want to become a historian about CCP because a lot of you watching now, you should study it for yourselves. It is a true eye-opener. But I'll give you one last morsel of history that we should have been taught in school. And there's a magnificent document called the 9 Commentaries on the Chinese Communist Party. For any of you that are on the podcast right now, you really want to write that down.
Yeah, that's all right. I'll put it down in the links.
Okay, great. So what you've got is there was a stage when Mao was still leading the initial sort of 20 years or so of the communist stronghold in China. It was the Great Leap Forward. And what is believed is that he followed Hitler in the way of understanding that you must be a military might in the world if you really want to hold your ground in that way. And so he had every man, woman, and child all around China have the government build a blast furnace in their backyards. And he had them start to melt down every single fraction of steel that you could find anywhere and make bullets, grenades, tanks, whatever it is that was able to be made, both on a minor scale, which would be the people with their blast furnace in the backyard, and the major scale, which is obviously, we know China's always had quite good infrastructural manufacturing. And so what he actually achieved was a nationwide famine, because he had all the farmers and everyone do this. And so there was no food being produced. And there were a couple of other things which happened, which were almost just biblical to them. And it caused a nationwide famine. Now, across China, cannibalism was rife, absolutely rife. And I'm not exaggerating. You need to look at the history books. And in the Chinese, I think it was in Beijing, they said, actually in the Chinese government compounds, they had human dishes being served. So the question, why would these regimes go ahead and do that? I think most of us get it. The essence of it is they have an evil understanding of life, and they don't mind impacting on the rest of the world to achieve what they want to achieve with that understanding. That's all. It's so simple. But I will, sorry, because I could talk under wet cement, everyone, so please excuse me.
Yeah, it's fine.
Then what happened was, because the other one last bit is that minor cadre, Jiang Zemin, became president in the end. That minor cadre, whose idea it was to make these kids into jam from rolling over them with tanks, he became the next premier. So he was the premier when Li Hongzhi was lecturing in China, and he was watching while half the government was taking to this beautiful Buddhist practice and benefiting from it. As we all know, everything of the Buddhist school is just so exquisitely open. And you'll see that with Falun Gong. And so Jiang Zemin put out, being the premier, he put out investigations into Falun Gong, into the numbers, into anything that he could harness as information. And he also had people go to Li Hongzhi and say to him, in essence, good work, Lee. Okay, now let us take over. We'll take over for you. But Teacher Lee wouldn't have it. And he said, no. He said, this is a true, pure path. So there's no government intervention. There's no people benefiting, in different ways from it. So after all of that, and after Jiang Zemin finding out that there were so many people practicing, he simply outlawed it. There's a video online of him in Parliament ranting like a complete lunatic, saying that this thing is taking over our people. It is not of our communist path, or blah, 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 blah. And he said from now on, Falun Gong is completely outlawed. And he actually formed a Gestapo agency, again, learning from all of the worst actions in our world, I think. He formed a Gestapo agency called the 610 Office with the police that had absolute carte blanche to do anything they wanted to Falun Gong practitioners to stop the practice in China. And I mean anything they wanted. And if any of you are letting your imagination roll over a little, it's all there. It's all there.
Because they started executing people, well, allegedly, whatever it is, and using their organs in the international transplant. So they would sell the organs. And then, with the video that you showed me about the two Davids, how they needed to account for where all these organs were coming from, that they sort of had their tail between their legs a little bit, didn't they?
My goodness. And everyone, if you simply Google Falun Gong bloody harvest, there have been books written about this subject of Jiang Zemin had these thousands upon thousands upon thousands. To be honest, I'm not allowed to say true figures because the regime has released them. So, as in released the amount of Falun Gong practitioners who have had this done to them, because to this day they've never admitted it. So all I can say is squillions of people that have been incarcerated for doing nothing more than following truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance, which are the founding principles of Falun Dafa. And while they're there, the government has blood matched them. So they've taken blood from them while they're in prison, blood matched online what organs are needed around the world at the moment, which you can imagine are tons. Our hospitals are always bursting with need to save lives. And so then they will go back to that woman, they'll take out all of her organs, including eyeballs, then they will cremate the body and sell all those organs immediately online.
Yeah, and this is part of the reason why they weren't allowed to do international transplants anymore. They got sanctioned for that, didn't they?
Unfortunately, not enough.
So it's still occurring, you think?
It's still occurring. Luke mentioned the two Davids, David Martis and David Kilgore. Now, I've been practicing quite a decent amount of time, so I've been involved in trying to help stop this persecution in China for a long time. Those two men, I actually was master of ceremonies for one of their lectures in Melbourne, Australia, when I lived there. They are insanely beautiful men. I know that sounds like a negative and a positive put together, but we have men who they don't even practice Falun Gong. All they had was a couple of Chinese people in Canada, in Winnipeg, Canada, come to them with this information. And both of them are very heavily involved in human rights. And they simply couldn't believe it. It was beyond belief how this could be happening on such a large scale, and they didn't know it. And so they did a 2-year legal investigation, proved the whole lot beyond any shadow of a doubt with something like, I think it was 13 judicial pieces of evidence, like an insane amount of pieces of evidence that cannot ever be denied. They're just true to the letter. And so that was how all of this ran. And in actual fact, at that time, when they brought out the legal papers, I was working in Sydney, Australia. And when I found out that the guys had turned it into a book and that they had donated squillions of these books to the Falun Dafa associations, because of course this information helps people to understand the truth, I actually got a load of those books sent to Melbourne because I knew that Melbourne was the legal fraternity of Australia, quit my job, went to Melbourne, bought myself a couple of suits and a trench coat because it's freezing.
It is.
And a scooter, and I scooted around Melbourne delivering them to all of the lawyers and the barristers, which was hilarious and great at the same time. And so I guess from what I've said so far, I've painted a pretty big picture, which is Falun Dafa, in my understanding, especially after these 21 years, is an absolutely beautiful practice for everyone. And the Chinese knew it. They knew that it held the foundations of amazing things. And the regime, being led by this just evil man, Jiang Zemin, and he was the one who perpetrated this forward, him and about 3 other Politburo members, very high Politburo members. The rest of the regime they were shocked. They couldn't believe that something that was benefiting China in so many ways, the people, their families. Falun Gong practitioners are always asked to be good people in society, including work hard, be on time, treat others super well. It was literally like a big fat lotus flower in the middle of China, and even the regime was benefiting from it. But Jiang Zemin wouldn't have it because it was a spiritual practice.
So I guess if we're touching on the spiritual side of it, can you explain to your best ability the advantages of practicing?
That's a lot. The advantages of practicing go from the utter minuscule to something that monks would only want. What I mean by that is, when I first, later down the line, I'll tell you how I bumped into Falun Gong. When I first did the exercises, I had the most incredible sensation. Two of them. One of them was, I think I was Yeah, I was in the seated meditation because there's 5 exercises of Falun Gong. I was in the seated meditation and I knew, I can remember it like it was yesterday. I'm sitting there in the darkness with my eyes closed, obviously, and remembering, I mean, I was like as external a person as you will ever have met. I was a PT. I was a personal trainer for over a decade. So
you're working on your outsides and ignoring your insides, which is, if you've listened to any podcasts that I've done so far, I actually talk about that quite a bit, saying that I've spent almost 20 years just really caring about my outsides until I realized that I have an inside as well.
and so I'm sitting there, and at the time I was pretty huge after, 2 decades of bodybuilding, but I'm sitting there, that's it, and
Exactly.
I'm doing this exercise, and all of a sudden, a very profound knowledge came to me, which was what you are experiencing right now is not just relaxation. The clarity and the peace that I found inside of my head at that moment was just something extraordinary. The other part of the information that I got was, this isn't just from you. In other words, it wasn't just me. I am doing this. I realized very, very strongly that this practice has very, very special energies and benefits. Talking about benefits from the practice itself, from what Li Hongzhi is bringing to the world and he himself. And so that was very unusual for me to take in, to be honest, because I went there only because my best friend at the time, that was like a brother to me, went and did it. And he came back home and said, man, I still don't know what this thing is, but it's really, really good. And I was like, really? I said, Steve, like, explain to me why it's so good. And he said, I just can't. You feel it, you just know it. And so anyway, I went there the next weekend. So that was one of the things that came to me. But it's not like this mind-blowing thing where all of a sudden you're raising up in the air and that's how you know it's so powerful. Not at all. Although there is plenty of that as well. And the second one was, after I'd finished the meditation, I stood up and I honestly, and I know this is a strange thing to say, and many of us who have, like Luke, myself, many others who have genuinely felt spiritual things, they're very hard to explain. And when you explain them simply, they can sound pretty silly. I stood up and I genuinely could not feel my feet on the ground. And even because this is all happening, as you and I know, the mind works incredibly fast. So in a split second, I'm gauging all of these strange things and I'm like, what's going on? And I look down. I actually looked down at my feet to make sure that I was on.
Can I tell you what happened yesterday when I did my very first exercise? So I did the exercise where there was a bit of a warm up where you do a little bit of a shake and you're tapping in your head and you're tapping all these other sections. And then you're moving your hands up from your navel up into your head and you're switching that around. So I don't know what that exercise is called, but when I was doing that exercise, and this is absolutely no shit. I'm not spinning it anything at all. So when I was listening to the teacher online on YouTube, because that's what I did, I went on to YouTube and I did my little research and I saw some reports on it. And then I actually thought, okay, let's give this a crack. Okay. So I found a video. I noticed that in the heading, they had a word that was misspelt, but that's fine. And then I started
Chinese did it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Discussion had like 3 S's. It's only supposed to have 2. But that was fine. So I just, I moved past that, didn't worry about it, had a bit of a laugh. And then I started doing the exercise. Okay. And the freaky thing is, so not every time, it actually happened 3 times. So when the instructor said something like, feel the happiness, okay, literally seconds before, okay, I felt a little bit of a tingle. And I thought, okay, that's fine. I didn't worry about it. Okay. The second time, I smiled. And then he said, just a second after, remember to smile. And it was like, fuck off. Really? And I was like, fuck off. And then and then the third one was, I thought in my head, okay, I'm ready to stop. And then he said, okay, we're going to stop now. And for me, that was a little bit, look, I feel like I've been trying to be on a path of being in tune with existence and life and energy. But like those kind of things happening, like I didn't have anything else that happened yesterday that really was very interesting. But my first time doing the exercises, and that's what happened. I did tell my friend who called me straight afterwards because he was like, what are you doing? I said, I'm interviewing this guy about this new exercise. It's like a Chinese yoga. And I told him, and he's like, oh, that's pretty fucking freaky. And he's like, he's a bit of a bogan. And I said, yeah, it's very freaky. He goes, you're going to keep on doing it? And I was like, yeah, I don't know, man. I'll try it out. If like 5 exercises, can you go through the benefits of these 5, not the benefits, but what does each exercise, what's the goal of each exercise?
And Luke, I'll tell you something. When I first did the exercises that I was just sharing with you guys afterwards, and I went home and went back to my life, I wasn't going back. Even though I had such extraordinary experiences, I just thought it was wonderful. But, we're Westerners, to be honest. And 2 weeks later, the guy, Gabriel, who spoke to my best mate, Stephen, on the movie set at Dreamworld, because Stephen worked in Australian movies and Gabe is a stylist in movies worldwide. Gabe came to dinner with us and our girlfriends and another bunch of friends. And Gabe turns around to me and says, what do you think of Falun Dafa? I said, oh, that was really good. He said, what do you think of Juan Falun? I said, what? He said, Juan Falun, that's Falun Dafa, the teaching, Juan Falun. I said, I don't even know what you're talking about. And he just rolled his eyes at me. He was a typical Greek man, beard like this. And he just hunched over from his chair and he pulled out his own book and he gave it to me. And he said, that's Falun Dafa. The exercises are only part of Falun Dafa, but the core of it is the teaching. And so that's interesting what you just said, mate. It's like we're 2 peas in a pod. But getting back to the benefits. So these 5 exercises, you've got 4 standing exercises and you've got 1 seated meditation. And any of you who have looked into the Taoist school, into the Tao school, the Taoist cultivation ways and religions, you'll note that a lot of them do standing meditations. This kind of standing, holding a wheel, knees slightly bent, etc. So the first exercise opens energy channels, and it is a stretching exercise, incredibly energetic. The second exercise is a standing meditation where you hold particular postures or periods of time. The third exercise is the exercise that Luke was talking about. The fourth exercise is a circulatory exercise which goes around the entire body. And the fifth exercise, as I said, is seated meditation. But the seated meditation also has something very unique to it. There are a few very unique things about Falun Gong because it is a genuine cultivation way. So it's very rich. There are Buddha hand signs that you do at the beginning of the fifth exercise, and they're very easy to learn. They're not like having to do exactly split-second timing with any particular movement. Teacher Lee teaches all about that so that you're very clear on where the true energy lies in any true cultivation way. One of the most stunning things I found with Falun Gong is that Teacher Lee, even during the teaching, Juan Falun, even during the teaching says, he's not saying you have to follow me. You don't have to follow Falun Gong. No one can be forced to follow something true and genuine. He said, if you follow something else that is a genuine cultivation way, I'll approve of it as well. Very profound words. Words that I think are a little too, it's been too long since we heard this kind of true stuff. So these exercises are what's called cultivation of your benti, in Chinese, B-E-N-T-I, benti. And your benti in Chinese is understood as your physical body and all of your other bodies in other dimensions. So many of us know through so many different spiritual practices, meditation practices, religions, that our actual self is incredibly special. But of course, it hurts us all the time. We're hungry every day. We're thirsty every day.
Yeah.
Feasting is enough to make us cry, let alone everything else that we go through. On the other end of that, we know there is something intrinsically unexplainable about the human mind, body, and spirit. So Teacher Lee teaches all of that. So the exercises help cultivate what is understood as this bhante. And it's probably why you felt so connected, Bud, with just a little splash at one of the exercises, because they're incredibly powerful. Having said that, because we do online exercise webinars, all free, of course. Everything's. One quick story. These were back in the days where I would teach and do all 5 exercises online with a big group of people from around the world, and do that every third day sometimes. And one lady, because I would come to the screen and, hey everyone, and if anyone has any questions at this stage, and one lady, she must have been an elderly lady, said to me on text, Michael, I really appreciate you doing this for me, but I'm finding my joints are aching. I have a bit of a rheumatoid arthritis problem. And I'm kind of listening to her at the same time that I'm reading out her kind of feeling who she is. And I just thought, I'll say, Judy, sometimes some things that you come across might be a little bit, there might be a couple of roadblocks put in your way to really just feeling out for yourself what this really is. Sometimes it's good to go through the roadblocks and just really see it for yourself. Stay on, see how you go. Literally, that was exercise 2, I think. Or no, that was the end of exercise 1. And then by exercise 4, I came to the screen. I hadn't said a word. She couldn't stop typing. Michael, I can't believe what just happened. Exercise 3, blah, 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 exercise 4, blah, blah, blah. How does all of that happen? And I said to her, that's what you were waiting for.
We've spoken a bit about energy blockages on this podcast. I had a shaman a few weeks ago, and he was also talking about energy blocks and in association with the chakras. So in terms of doing these exercises, it can assist with the arm blockage or the blockage that you may have with energy.
2 experiences I'll share with you. One, and the answer is yes, but of course, everything in true cultivation, in my understanding, it really comes down to us. Like the old saying, when the student is ready, the master will appear. It's a very important old saying, but that doesn't mean that that student will become a master. That student has to work and work to become, but there's fundamental things there. After I'd been practicing probably about 3 or 4 months, and when you really start to practice is when you're reading Zhuan Falun and you really start to study it and really start to cultivate these principles that are taught in Zhuan Falun. And I was at New Farm Park in Brisbane, and this guy came, and I'm not kidding. If any of you have watched the Bruce Lee episodes, the Chinese-made Bruce Lee episodes, there's this awesome bit where this guy comes and fronts up Bruce Lee as a one-armed man, and he's, fit as a Mallee bull, and he takes on Bruce Lee and even defends himself well against him, even with one arm, and then he pulls out the other arm. Well, this kind of guy, I'm not kidding, built like a Mallee bull, obviously something different. And actually, he probably accorded with me because at the time I was still built like a Mallee bull. And we sat down for the 5th exercise after we'd done the others. He'd come just to learn the exercises. And once we'd finished, we were just sitting there, and I just said to the group, I think there was only about 5 or 6 of us, is there anything anyone would like to ask or share? And he said to me, Michael, I'm part of a Taoist cultivation way. One of the most difficult energy lines to open up is called the boot channel. And he said it runs up from the back of the legs through the buttocks and upwards. He said, I watched it blast open. And he just looked at me like I knew what he was talking about, which I didn't. And he said, how is that possible? And I said, well, I really had to think about it because I'd only just started practicing. So I'd only read the book a few times. And I said to him, look, to be honest, I'm not a teacher. I said, if you really want to know why, you got to read Zhuan Falun. You got to understand it from its core. And at the same time, these exercises, even though I was told that they were incredibly powerful, all I've ever felt from them are things that you can't see, just like what you've experienced. But now they are incredibly powerful because you've got third eye. You can see all of these different channels. And he just accepted that wholeheartedly, and that was it. So that's one sharing, just to give you an idea of the power of the practice. To your question, can it unblock channels? There's one answer to that, of course. Absolutely, of course it can. One of the other things is Teacher Lee in Juan Falun even explains that. Luke, I tell you what, this is quite extraordinary, you and I on this podcast, because you're just saying things that are so key, and explains how, in my words, one of the fundamental drawbacks during a person's spiritual path in life is their character. They haven't yet let go of enough to be able to have these miraculous things happen for them simply because they haven't let go of enough of the everyday desires and emotions and feelings and reactions and all of this stuff that actually, in any genuine religion or cultivation way of the Buddha Dao, Chimen, whatever it is, they all teach becoming a better person. And as we all know, even as a child, I knew goodness is kindness, wickedness is anger, stealing, blah, 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 all of these things. And so this is one fundamental reason, in my understanding, after these 21 years of practicing, and I feel it in myself every day, the only drawbacks to my path are myself, and the most powerful part of myself I must keep connecting to and connecting to by continually letting go of all of these everyday things that, to be honest, are all taught in Juan Falun. Everything's there in Juan Falun to guide us.
What you touched on those holding on to everyday things, holding on to identity. What's the worst thing that can happen in terms of holding on and being obsessed with these choices that you made such a long time ago, or maybe something that was instilled to you where you had no choice because it was just a repetitious message? Because for myself, I mean, being in that vein, it really takes hold of my energy. It takes hold of my creativity, probably more than anything else. And I would say heightens my desperation.
I see what you mean. Yeah, I see what you mean. There's one thing that Teacher Lee does a lot of. He's not teaching just one level of spectrum. When I started, I'll tell you, when I first started, have we got time for another quick story?
Yeah, because I have a few more questions, so definitely you go for it.
When Gabriel handed me Juan Falun. At the time, my girlfriend and I went back to our place, and we had this gorgeous big day lounge, carved wooden day lounge in the middle of our lounge area. And I perched myself up on there. And I don't think Nat could believe it, to be honest, because she's looking at me like, you never read. I was either skydiving, rollerblading, martial arts, bodybuilding, running with clients, or whatever, but I was never reading. And I perched.
So funny. I just said that in my last podcast. I literally just said that I was doing everything else, but I wasn't reading. I was never reading.
There you go.
It's crazy.
And so I perched myself up there, and I started reading, and I could almost feel Nat's eyes in the back of my head, like searing in the back of my head. Like, what are you doing? And every single word, literally for the first 10 pages, 15 pages, I'm a fairly slow reader. I couldn't believe how this guy was just explaining things so thoroughly. And I knew to my core that what he was explaining was stuff that no one was out there explaining. Absolutely no one. And at the same time, I knew that what he was saying was true. And by the time I'd finished reading, I had sat there about 4 hours. It was about midnight. And by this time, my girlfriend was sitting up in bed. I think she was worried. She was worried. She thought, is this the same guy? And I just shut the book. And I remember just looking up thinking, this is something I can do. Now, we're talking about a completely self-centered person. I hate to say that, although
I admitted it in my last podcast that the biggest sin that I ever had was that I I described it a different way, but the best way to describe it was that I was just really sheltered because I just never investigated anything except what was on the TV.
And so I was a person who had lived literally all of his life. I must say, and that's maybe for another podcast, my early childhood was very different. That had some quite profound things. And when I lived in Hong Kong for a period of time, before actually coming into contact with Falun Gong, that was unbelievable. But all of those things I took very lightly. Like they were just little experiences that happen in life. And so for all intensive purposes, my whole life revolved around muscle and ego and vanity and health, external health, which I taught people every day, and helping people actually to become more like what I was physically. That's really what my whole life was. And even with someone like me, I could see clearly that all of this is real and true and good. And it is what we should all be following if we can. Because not only does it take one into a spiritual path with everything in their world, their husbands, wives, personal training careers, everything, nothing needs to be extricated because of it. But it also, because it is centered around this Jin Shan Ren, truth, compassion, and tolerance, it heals everything around us. It is good for our families. It is good for our relationships. Because of Falun Dafa, I can tell you, I have nearly 20-year marriage to a woman who I've gone through everything with, as in all of the arguments, all of the differences, had to work out so many things, who she has her own character. I have my own character. And of course, that comes to clash. Through all of that, my practice has developed my marriage into, I often say to my wife now, honey, you and I are like kids. We're like teenagers and we've been married 20 years. How many people can say that at the moment? Falun Dafa has allowed me to be a father to what is now a 17-year-old son who I just delivered him to his first job in a propagation nursery, his very first day at his very first job. And it has allowed me to have a relationship with my son that most psychologists would tell you to have with your children, where you've got to be their best friend as well. Well, my son is both salutes me and tells me everything because he knows that, or he's gone through 17 years of a man who's been changing and bettering himself to the point where Sebastian has everything from me. He has the best brother he'll ever have. He'll have the best friend he'll ever have. But he also has a father who'll still smack his behind if he gets right out of line. And so this is circling back to answer, what does Falun Gong do in our lives? The other thing is too, my wife, Angela, has gone through quite a lot of physical suffering in her life. She's actually going through quite a bit of it now. And a lot of us, one of them is sciatica. For any of you listening to Luke and I now, there you are, sciatica.
Yeah, I've had it before. I had it for 10 years.
There you are.
Yeah, and I was able to shake it through exercises. I went to almost 20 specialists until I tapped into this chiropractor in Geelong. And then everything changed for me with association with the exercises. But the key was to move, not to stay still, but to move.
To move.
Yeah, I was afraid to move. I was petrified to move. And that also circulated within a whole nother aspect of identity, as we were touching on before. But yeah, sciatica is one of the worst pains ever. I was on Lyrica for a while, and it touched on it a few podcasts ago that it actually transformed my personality, that it made me an angrier person because I was in pain all the time.
There you are.
So I feel you, Angela. I really do.
Yep, there you are. And so she is actually utilizing her exercises, her meditation, and her practice to get through this very, very well. And so in that way, one of the benefits is Falun Dafa, because you're cultivating a spiritual path that encompasses everything. It's not a small thing. It encompasses everything you could think about where thought comes from. The mere understanding of where do my emotions come from? That's a big question which no scientist will ever answer. it's answered in Zhuan Falun. So as you begin to cultivate with this enormous picture that Li Hongzhi gives everyone, you begin to truly understand what it is to stand back and be the observer, which Luke and I have already spoken about. This is an immense thing, and it has many layers of immense things. But to actually experience it, you really need to, there are lots of factors and they're all good, but it is an incredible thing. So with Angela's path, this has come into her path. Also, I'll give you something else. My son, my son turned about 10 years old, I started to teach him a bit of boxing, just starting with peripheral movement so that he understood what it is to see things coming before potentially they reach you. So it was just movement. It really wasn't, bashing each other up or anything. Not quite yet. And Sebastian, I watched achieve controlling the worst parts of himself at the age of 5. The very first time we were in our lounge room. And of course, Seb's 5. My son's very mildly on what people call now the spectrum, which is a tangible thing. We know that so many of the world's children are coming into the world with things that a couple of generations back no one really had, or next to no one had. But now we're dealing with them, and we're dealing with them beautifully in so many ways. But my son is what people call low on the spectrum. One of the things that he had as a child, which is common for people who carry this kind of weight, it really is a weight, is anger. He would go off the Richter scale, absolutely off the Richter scale for particular things like loss, if he felt like it was going to get something that he thought he should have, all sorts of things. Now, Seb grew up with Ange and I practicing Falun Gong. I'd been practicing, I think, about 4 or 5 years when he was born. Ange had been practicing, I think, not long at all, a year. So when Seb was at the point of beginning to speak, and he started to speak very late, naturally, him and I would talk all sorts of beautiful things about character, about why anger is wrong, how to really focus in on yourself with a good heart and be able to suppress all of these kinds of things.
My kids will say that the quote that I tell them the most is focus on yourself. That's the quote that I tell them the most.
There you are. And in Falun Dafa, Teacher Lee is constantly saying, look within. Look within. And so I watched Ange come out of the kitchen this day and jag Sebastian's responses of anger. And so he got really angry at her, and the two of them had a bit of a barney, and then Ange went back into the kitchen. And Seb looked over at me. I was sitting down on the couch, and Seb looked over at me, and I said, come here, come here, come here, come here. He was angry and a little bit teary. And I just sort of popped him in my lap, and I just reiterated, everything you did then was wrong. You got to understand that. You've got to realize too that you yourself can stop this. But it starts with you, little buddy. You're only 5, but you're immensely more powerful than you think. So anyway, I thought I was just having yet another one of the 1,000 conversations that we have with our children. And lo and behold, he goes back to his Lego. He's sitting down there. Angie's still got a bee under her bonnet in the kitchen, comes out to reignite it, says a few words. I watched my son at 5 years old go from this immediate, which is what our kids do, to the spark of realization, which he himself ignited, and he shut everything down, didn't say a word, and all of it just dissipated to nothing. And Ange gave him her spiel, and Seb just looked at her, and I think he was still thinking to himself, oh, is that what Dad's talking about? And Ange went back into the kitchen, and he looked at me. I'm crying by this time. I'm in tears because I'm watching the whole thing roll out. I'm in tears. And Seb just comes over and gives me a big hug and consoles me. So again, this keeps circling around to what benefit is there to Falun Dafa? There's benefits in every single fraction.
I'm actually listening to a quantum physics book about relativity. One of the chapters that they started talking about is what is light? Is it a wave or is it a proton or a particle? I can't remember which one. And one of the things that they observed is that light is a wave. Once it is starting to be observed, it actually changes character. It changes formation and becomes a particle or a proton. I can't remember which one. And I thought that was a really, really profound lesson of the universe trying to communicate with us and say, hey, you can't see anything without light. Like, we don't exist without light. So if light is changing because of the observation of it, what lesson should that be telling us? And one of the aspects of meditation is that observer part. It's the observer, because if you were watching yourself being a dickhead all the time, you would probably stop being, if you're watching yourself being angry all the time, like if there was an actual screen of you, like a big, like 80-inch screen of you, and, you're yelling and you're upset, or, you're putting someone down, or you just got this really bad energy in the peripheral vision, you could probably see all that. So I think that 99.9% of people, if they were having that large TV screen next to them, that they would change their behavior. And, it's that sort of simple. I do have one more question. We are just touching on over an hour. And I think you'll know where I'm coming from with this question, with some of the stuff that I watched yesterday. Do you take Panadol? Do you go to the hospital if you're sick?
Now, that is such a good question. Oh, you're amazing. Okay, back in China, when the regime first started to, I don't know if, I'm hoping that there's a few of you that are watching right now that do know a bit of history about, and you'll understand what I mean soon, do know a bit of history about how any and all of the communist regimes that have taken root in our world or tried to, how they've gone about it, how they've actually gone about taking root. Now, one of the things that all communist regimes do is they use propaganda in order to sway people's emotions. Now, I hate to say this, but the whole...
Well, that's what I was touching on before when I asked you that question, because it's a historical aspect to be able to control people, is to put them on a leash of fear.
So one of the things, and just to reiterate what I said just then as well, the whole world is doing this now. We've actually taken this yucky little principle and we've used it in everything from marketing to teaching kids to everything. And of course, like anything in our cosmos, there's a positive and a negative to all things.
I see parents do it when they say, oh, they're going to walk away from their kids. And it sometimes annoys me. Of course, I stay out of it. But I think that whole aspect of, okay, I'm going to leave you here. And I just kind of think to myself, really? That's not a really good thing to, I think to teach them with fear is to teach them to teach others with fear.
Well, the one thing that I found to just go adjacent to what we were talking about, I'm a very big believer, always have been, in traditional upbringing. And part of traditional upbringing is when you do something wrong, anger, jealousy, steal as a kid, all of these aspects, you get punishment. And there was all kinds of punishment, but unfortunately, the physical punishment in our time, probably especially yours and my time, and one time before, became too extreme. And so the kind of kickback from that was a very strong feeling that we should never actually give a child a smack. And that's something which I definitely see the benefits of. Like, to treat our children with reason is a very good thing. Now, with what the communist regimes have always done is to use propaganda to be able to sway people's emotions. And this element was used very strongly in China. Actually, sorry, mate, I'm an old man. What was the initial question again? Because we digressed too much.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, sorry, that's my fault. Sometimes I just jump in.
Same thing.
Yeah, that's fine. So the original question, just for the record, you take Panadol, you take Nurofen, you go to the hospital.
So one of the things that when the Jiang Zemin decided to turn literally the whole of China around to make them believe Falun Gong was bad instead of good, one of the things he focused on was Falun Gong practitioners don't go to the hospital. How awful. In other words, Teacher Lee's sending people to their deaths, obviously. He's a friggin' monster. And that's one of the things that they focused on. And this has been very big in their online propaganda about Falun Gong for 2.5 decades, because that's how long they've been trying to crush it. With all their best efforts and squillions of dollars spent, actually Falun Gong is only blossoming more and more around the world. Now, the truth, I believe, and this is just me talking, everyone remember, please, this is just a very humble practitioner talking. During my time of practicing Falun Dafa, both within myself and from what I've experienced of other practitioners, I've watched Nick, who's a wonderful man, Falun Dafa practitioner, very like the same as me, I think, 21, 23 years, go to the hospital because his worry about cancer, bowel cancer. And when he got to the hospital, they found cancerous, like quite a serious issue. And then he had his first chemo injection or whatever they do. And literally after the first chemo, everything disappeared, literally disappeared. All of it was gone. I've had differing problems that would certainly make people worry. Bowel, actually, to do with bowel. Things like gut pain, a lot of burping, or like feeling like I was celiac, or I was this, or I was that, which can be a myriad of things, a literal myriad of things, just those. And I didn't go to the hospital. Now, I haven't been to the hospital in 21 years. I haven't been to a doctor in 21 years. But those issues in my mind and in my understanding of my cultivation, if they are to be something extreme that is going to come and end me, well, then that's how it's really meant to be. That's how it's really meant to be. And if I choose to go to the hospital, I will go, most certainly. But if I don't choose to go, I certainly won't go. Now, that's one of the things that Falun Dafa gave me, because it gave me not just a spiritual kind of, this is what the three realms are all about kind of teaching, or not just this is what meditation is, and Falun Dafa gives you a massive picture of life. So you are literally the person in the driver's seat. And I don't mean that metaphorically, to be honest, because Falun Dafa focuses directly on your primordial spirit, the you that is thinking now. In Falun Dafa, there's no trance, there's no breathing techniques, there's no facing different directions, there's no some kind of chant or mantra that you do to try to get yourself into some kind of state. Falun Dafa is known as a Dafa, great way, and it focuses directly on what is known as the true you. Many people will know, for example, how many people have said to me, man, I am me. What if I'm going to get rid of all of me? Well, actually, they're right. In Falun Dafa, you don't want to get rid of you. You don't want to go into some kind of meditative trance that you sit in for 90 years. Definitely not. But Buddha Shakyamuni taught those kinds of aspects, and Buddha Shakyamuni's legacy still lives with us, thank goodness. Falun Dafa is something that cultivates the you yourself. Now, this is something huge, and it's not something that can be understood from this little person sitting here telling you those words. It really has to be understood when you read the myriad of things that Teacher Lee teaches to help you understand it. So those aspects allow you to be the person who chooses. Now, yes, in Falun Dafa, Teacher Lee explains about letting go of all of the worldly attachments. And they're not just letting go of meat, let go of having sex.
I'd die.
Infinitely they're infinitely broader than this. What he helps, and that's why Falun Dafa is so huge, is because it literally takes a person from wherever they are, whether they be like me, a non-spiritual person externally, or someone who's a monk in a temple for the last 30 years, Falun Dafa takes you from where you are and allows you to be able to elevate from there. So that's why, for example, when I went to do the exercises for the first time in New Farm Park, I met a young lady there. She would have been about my age, about 30, whatever. And I think she knew when she met me, this guy's going to keep cultivating. And she started to share with me a little, and she said, do you know what? I was diagnosed with Crohn's, very, very bad Crohn's from 10 years ago, I've been suffering it my whole life. She said, do you know how long it took for me to be totally gone of it? She said, 3 days. And she said, I'm not trying to be stupid about this. She said, I, like you, came to the practice site. I sat there, did the exercises. I went home. I loved them. She said, I loved them. She was very spiritual, though. She was leading spiritual paths. She said, I loved them. So I went home and I practiced again. She said, I practiced a couple of times the next day. I think she lived in a van, to be honest. She was like that, really, you could smell the incense on her. And she said, I went off to the doctor for my usual scans and change of medication and all the rest of it. And she said, I wasn't expecting it, but the doctor came out and just said, I think something's wrong with our machine because we can't actually see any of the tumors and ulcers that you had. We've just done your normal scan and there's nothing there. Can you please come back in and get scanned? As she went in and got scanned again, she was gone of it. Now, another quick one before we leave. My little brother, to be honest, my story is very boring. I haven't had anything that I can tell you is anything like that. But my own little brother, Trent, who lives just down the road from me, he was an ice addict for, must have been 7 or 8 years. By the time he was in his last days, which my mother and I knew they were going to be his last days, he was horrific. Like, he was selling, dealing, doing to the absolute extremes. And one day he rang me. I was a PT at that time. This was a long time ago. And him and his girlfriend were dying on the lounge room floor like they normally were. And before I sort of rushed out the door, I grabbed a copy of Chuan Falun. And I went there, I picked up Kat, put her in bed. She was half okay by that time. I took Trent downstairs and he was a mess. He was a bloody mess. And I put his head in my lap. He was lying on the couch like a little boy. And I said to him, listen, bud, you're a mess. You're probably not even really taking in properly what I'm saying. But you know that I've been practicing this Falun Dafa now for like 6 months or whatever. And he went, man, I know, I bet it's really good, hey, like this, in amongst his nutcase going off like he was a mess. And I kind of looked at him and I said, listen, I've brought a copy of Chuan Falun and I want to tell you, like, it's a bit of a shame, bud, that I've never told you about it because, to be honest, man, look at you. I never really thought you'd appreciate it, but, I want to tell you anyway. And I started to explain things really simply, and he just started crying. He burst out in tears, started crying. Oh, that was a long time ago. Anyway, and he said to me, bro, I know what you're saying is true. And again, I looked at him, I thought, wow, that's really okay. I said, listen, you're fine. I'm going to go because I've got to get up in like 4 hours for my first client. Give me a call tomorrow sometime. Let me know that you and Caddy are okay. So anyway, I get home as normal, 4:30. I get up and I get a phone call from him, and he says, "Bro, it's Trent." I'm like, "I know it's you. What's happening? It's very early, man." He said, "I haven't stopped reading since you left." I thought that was unusual for a start because he was pretty messy still when I left him. And I said to him, the first thought that came to my mind was, well, don't say anything negative, Mike. For crying out loud, don't say anything negative. And I said, bro, that's good, man. Keep reading. He said, you don't effing understand. I'm like, oh, okay. What do you mean I don't effing understand? He said, I've been reading all night and I haven't even had a hit. And of course, I was the opposite end of the world from Trent. I was a little angel boy in comparison. So I didn't quite understand what he meant. And I said, well, that's a good thing too, right? He said, okay. He said, I'll talk to you later. So I hung up, went and trained a couple of clients, came back home, gave him a call. And he said, bro, I don't know what's going on. Haven't had a hit. I feel fine, like I've not felt since I was a child. And I've got no cold turkey. I've got no nothing. What is going on? And I said to him, well, I said, you're one of these people that I'd only met in other practitioners, obviously. And I said, bud, don't squander what it is that you've just been given. Keep reading and let's talk later on the weekend when I see you. By the time I saw him on the weekend, he'd made his girlfriend go cold turkey, and he sat with her through the whole lot. I don't know if anyone watching knows what it's like for an ice addict to go
It's
cold.
horrific. Yeah, it's horrific.
It is horrific. A couple of good Australian movies that have been made that show that kind of thing. But
Yeah.
he got his girlfriend off ice. Over the course of about a month, he made an amazing relationship with his father and who's my stepfather. The two of them would almost kill each other sometimes. Started working in his father's business as a painter, got married to Kat. They have two gorgeous boys, and they live just down the road here in Bly Bly. And 3 years after he started practicing, and Trent wouldn't mind me telling you, he stopped. He stopped, even after all that. Even after all that. And I'll never forget, I was in Sydney at the time, and he just said, bro, I'm not good enough for this. He said, I'm stumbling on a few things pretty badly. I'm just not good enough for this beautiful. And I said to him, don't do this. This is one of the fundamental things that a practitioner goes through to make breakthroughs, not for it to break you, as in stop you believing that Falun Dafa is still for you. It's something good for you, no matter what you stumble on. Because I didn't even ask him. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to know the kind of things he was talking about, but he still let it go. So I guess this is a really good little personal experience of mine to help everyone know that, yes, the practice is incredibly powerful. Li Hongzhi is exactly who he says he is, a true Qigong master giving a true cultivation way of the Buddhist school. But cultivation's up to us. Cultivation's up to us in the end. And this is one of the most bitter pills to swallow. But if we can swallow it, if you can truly just, like Luke, you were saying just before, it's all about us. Yes, we all need a true teaching, but it's all about us, what we do with that teaching.
Yeah. Yeah. So is Trent still, like, is he alive still?
Yeah, no, he never went back to drugs. Actually, Trent became quite a wealthy man.
But yeah, he's alive and he lives down the road. It's still, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Because you kind of you said something before that made me think that he passed. So Okay. Great. That's awesome.
He's with us. What happened
Awesome.
was, the reason why I said that before was my mother and I both knew before that experience of me going to his house when he had an overdose that he didn't have long to live. Although he was still a young
Yeah. That's what you said. Yeah. You didn't have long to live. Yeah.
even though he was a young man.
Feel it, couldn't you? You could feel that. You could feel that the continuation of these habits was obviously coming to a peak, and it was either now or never, really.
Yeah, the peak was death. And the interesting thing is, I didn't take him the book to achieve what it achieved. I took the book because before I left, I got the thought in my mind of, this is your own brother, and you haven't even shared some of the most beautiful things in your world with him. And it was true. Like, Trent knew that I was, all of the other things that he knew I loved doing and how exciting that all was, etc. But the one most beautiful thing that had transformed me, I didn't share with him. That's why I took it there. I never in a million years would have expected for such a thing to occur because we don't. For example, I alluded to in Hong Kong, I had some pretty extraordinary experiences. One of them was levitation. And just very quickly, I was living in Hong Kong. I was personal training in Hong Kong. I was there with Steve, that same mate that I told you about, who was the one that first came in contact with Falun Dafa. And there were a few things that were happening which I knew were unusual. One was I was sitting on William Door, which is one of the main streets of Hong Kong, where they have some beautiful restaurants and patisseries and things. And I would sit and go into like this really still meditative state. And I kind of knew that I was doing it, but it was very odd because I'd never done that before. And at the gym, because I was still bodybuilding, I was at the gym in Sha Tin, where the race course is. But I was doing stuff that I'd never done before, weights that all of a sudden I could do. I'd get on the running machine, I'd put the thing to the max, and I just couldn't get out of breath. I couldn't get out of breath. I'd run like I was a madman, and I could just keep going. I remember getting off and Steve saying to me, "What the hell are you doing? You've been on there half an hour, running like your strides are almost 3 meters long just to keep up with it." And I knew there was something different going on. And then I was on the way to the gym one day. I came down from our apartment. I stopped in at a couple of the markets. They had these trinket markets at the bottom of our street. And oh man, they just had boxes worth of gold, and you literally sift through them. Anyway, I'm sifting through it. I'm like, I better go. And so I'm off to the gym, and then it happened. Bang, just literally. I'm walking, and I could feel myself just lift off the ground slightly. And I'm still walking, and then everything around me turned to slow-mo. And even when I was turning my head, because I was inside my own head, I was going, this is cool. Like, I thought it was amazing. And as I was turning my head slowly, I watched a bird pass between the two buildings. And you can imagine, like, we're talking the island, Hong Kong. The buildings are so high. I watched a bird seemingly take forever to fly from one building to the next. And then it went away as quickly as it came. And so what I meant in the beginning of our interview by, yes, some certain things have happened, they were never purposeful things. And I tell you something, the more I cultivate, the more I realize many, I'd say most of us in our lives have had different things happening to us that lets us know that things are just so truthfully bigger than anything you can see. And so that was quite interesting, because it's when I started practicing the real things that all of a sudden it's almost like I was told, right, forget about all that, pal. Now you've got to work hard on your heart and mind, and therein lies the true path. And so they're parts that have been hard.
Okay, so we're going to wrap it up now, and we're going to wrap it up the way that we always wrap it up at Soulwidth. We ask everyone this question: what does abundance mean to you?
That's what abundance is. The way. That's what true abundance is, because it encompasses everything, even what people think are not good. It is truly an abundance that is an endless, incredible path that we can only be fortunate enough to look into.
So if anyone wants to find any more information, where should they go to?
Just falundafa.com.
That's all right. We'll put that link in the show notes, and I will actually put a couple of videos on our YouTube page of what I've been watching, and so people can get a really good insight into it, and also some exercises as well. If you want to do the same, Michael, you want to recommend anything that the audience would be into, any of your videos or any other videos, just let me know. But thank you very much for your time today, Michael. You have been extremely generous with your mind, body and soul. And dude, I'm just grateful for the connection. I truly am. So thank you.
Thank you, and see you, everyone.
I'll switch off the record.